I wonder what Easter makes you think of. Maybe you think about lots of chocolate and hot cross buns. Or maybe you think of going to church and hearing that same old message year in, year out. Or maybe, if you stop and really think about it, you actually might think that the message of Easter is pretty weird and, frankly, unbelievable. After all, the claims that Christians make about Easter are pretty unbelievable. That Jesus was captured by Roman authorities and was put to death on a cross. Then, after 3 days, his mourning disciples show up to his empty grave to find nothing. And over the next several weeks, there are many sightings of Jesus before he eventually rises up into heaven in front of his disciples. Pretty crazy story, right? Many people hear this story and just write it off as a fairy tale, thinking that the Bible is just a collection of stories that religious people made up to give their lives some bigger meaning. Except here's the thing. If you read into the historical evidence behind the Bible, you discover that actually there's more historical evidence for the existence of Jesus than there is for Julius Caesar. You'll find plenty of people who don't believe that Jesus was God, but there are no serious historians who actually debate that he was a real person who existed in Israel around 2,000 years ago. Okay, so there was a guy called Jesus who walked around the earth 2,000 years ago. He claimed to be God, and look, he managed to convince a few uneducated Jewish people to follow him around. That doesn't make his claims right. After all, maybe he was just a really nice guy who had some wise things to say about looking after the poor and being a good person. But a person dying and then rising from the dead 3 days later, that is truly an outrageous claim. And you'd be right in thinking that. It is an outrageous claim. It's also a really significant claim. In fact, it's such a significant claim that the entire Christian faith hinges on Jesus rising back to life. If he didn't rise from the dead, then he wasn't who he claimed to be. And the Bible even agrees with this. 1 Corinthians 15:14 says, "And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." So maybe Jesus was just a con man, or maybe he was even insane and had delusions of being God and managed to convince just a handful of random people. Many people have ultimately come to this conclusion. Look, in a modern world, we're too educated for that, maybe. But here's an interesting thought for you. Jesus gathered 12 close followers, what the Bible calls disciples. And if you read the accounts of the Bible, they had a very interesting reaction to his death. We know from Roman historical accounts that Jesus was a real person who lived and was executed by the Romans. The Bible account tells us that his 12 disciples were initially incredibly afraid after his death. And why wouldn't you be? The person you'd just been following around for the last several years of your life had been publicly executed, and the authorities were trying to get rid of you too. Jesus had promised to be their savior and ultimately claimed to be God, but now he was dead. I'd be afraid too if I was them. Yet, by all accounts, something changes in them. They go from being afraid and hiding behind locked doors to going out to spend the rest of their lives telling other people about the death and resurrection of Jesus. Again, we know from external accounts that these people actually did this, and most of them died for the sake of their message. Have you ever thought about why they would do that? They didn't gain anything from continuing to tell people that Jesus had died and risen again to life. They didn't gain money. They didn't gain power. They didn't gain status. In fact, for most of them, all they really gained was suffering, persecution, and ultimately being put to death. And look, on the contrary to what you might think, people 2,000 years ago were just as aware as you are that people don't come back to life several days after their death. So surely the only answer can be that something happened after Jesus' death that led these 12 disciples to continue to tell people that there was something different and special about Jesus. Not just that he was a really smart guy, or that he was really kind, or that he was really wise, but something happened to convince them that he really was God. All 12 of them. Almost all of them were put to death for their faith, yet none of them changed their minds. maybe, just maybe, they saw something that changed their minds for the rest of their lives. A truth that they weren't willing to let go of, even to the point of death. And if that claim does turn out to be real, that the God of this universe came to earth and died to build a new relationship with you, then that is something to truly be thankful for this Easter. So can I encourage you to check these claims out for yourself this Easter?